Hi, I'm Carlin.
And I'm Elaine.
We're sisters.
And this is our podcast, Related.
Fancy seeing you on here.
I know, at this pre-appointed time that we decided to record.
I know.
So how are you feeling? Thanksgiving is definitely over. It's halfway through December.
Thanksgiving definitely over. Got through my Black Friday shopping, which I know you vehemently protest.
Yeah. I don't vehemently protest. I just do not partake because
do not partake.
Capitalism.
I know. I will say I did try to withhold, but girl's gotta get her new laptop and upgrade her wardrobe a little bit. So
I totally understand.
Yeah. But no, it's good. It's this weird part of the year where things are both really insanely busy because everyone's trying to wrap things up before they go on vacation and holiday and whatnot. And yet also feeling kind of checked out and very ready for just a bit of a break.
Anyway, today we're going to be talking about one of the hallmarks of the holiday season. I came up with that on the spot.
I kind of love it. Brilliant, Elaine. Brilliant.
Thank you. We're going to be talking about Hallmark movies.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about our personal experience with Hallmark movies, the larger cultural phenomenon, and even more broadly, the trends in female gender depiction in media. And I know, Carlin, you have some...
Oh, yeah. My research brain went down the rabbit hole of the history of Hallmark and how many people are watching and whatnot. The most recent stat I could find was that in 2021, Nielsen said that approximately 80 million people are watching Hallmark Christmas movies every year. I don't know the breakdown of that. I'm assuming the majority is women, but we'll go into this. I just find it fascinating.
I mean, that's like a quarter of Americans. That boggles my mind.
Yeah, you're so right. You're so right. Well, you're so right. That's so many people. That's a lot of people. So
that's a lot of people.
And so clearly Hallmark is on to something, and we should dive into it.
Yeah. So, Carlin, tell me a little bit about your experience with Hallmark movies.
Oh, Hallmark movies. I honestly first discovered them probably through you. I think there might have been a holiday Thanksgiving. It must have been one of the ones where I came back to DC to celebrate with you all, and you were in Hallmark movie mode and or excited for Hallmark movie mode, and we watched a couple together. I don't know if you remember that Thanksgiving. We just watched a lot of Hallmark holiday movies.
I kind of remember that. Yes.
Yeah, and the rest is history. I don't think I had really tapped into the Hallmark holiday movie phenomenon until then. And then I did date a guy briefly. This must have been either before or maybe right around the same time, honestly, because this might have been when I was living in New York. And I dated a guy who he and his sister every holiday would just watch Hallmark holiday movies. It was part of their sibling tradition. And so I joined in on a couple and hopped on very happily into the bandwagon. But yeah. How about you? Because you were the one who introduced me. So how did you first?
Yeah. So I think I had watched like one or two in like early years, but never got really into them. And then after the pandemic hit, I was like alone in my apartment looking for things to do that would make me feel like not depressed for a little bit. And they're very light and easy to watch. And even though it was March and April, I was watching Christmas movies. But Hallmark also has non-Christmas movies, which we're not going to talk about. I just watched a lot of Hallmark movies because, oh my gosh, I just took my mind off things for an hour and a half. And I didn't have to think about the fact that I was alone, isolated in a little apartment. So yeah. And I think that carried over until the next year, which was, I think, the year you came back for Thanksgiving. Which would have been that year where we watched them together. And then last year, I didn't watch them at all. I was like trying to watch some in preparation for this conversation and was like, I've not watched any of the 2023 Hallmark movies, which is so funny because I was like really obsessed.
Yeah.
Like I really dug down into them.
Wait, why do you think that is?
I think I just didn't have the same need for them, like emotionally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like they were really an escape.
Yeah.
This year I've watched a couple and they're enjoyable and I like them. I don't have that same obsessive need to watch them, but they really are just like a little taste of the holiday season.
I agree.
And the holiday spirit.
I agree. That's interesting. I've dabbled. As you know, I watched this season's Lindsay Lohan. Last season's Lindsay Lohan was subpar, but this one was, gets a 10 out of 10 in the grand scheme of things. Also, technically not Hallmark, but Netflix. But we'll go into that, I'm sure, is that there's this broader category beyond what Hallmark has produced. I've watched more that have been licensed on Netflix, so they're probably 2023. But I haven't also felt the need to. But I also think during the pandemic where I was home alone and I don't know, looking for a good, easy romance, etc., it was a good way to get it in.
Yeah. And I think what you're talking about, like the Netflix licensing this year, which has been like a huge thing.
Yeah.
I think in people being able to watch them. And I think there's also now a Hallmark Plus app, which is like streaming for Hallmark, which they did not have when I was watching them. But I think it speaks to like the increased cultural awareness of Hallmark movies, especially in the last 5 years. Like I feel like it's really boomed.
Yeah, agreed.
Before we get into the cultural phenomenon, I think we have to talk about what even is a Hallmark movie.
What is a Hallmark movie?
What is a Hallmark movie? Which seems so funny to define as someone who has watched them. You know it when you see it.
Yes. And we should also preface that for the most part, we're using the blanket term Hallmark movie, but we're talking specifically about holiday movies for the most part, the focus, and that Hallmark is the biggest producer of these movies, which we'll go into, but also Lifetime does them. Netflix now does them. Hulu now does them. But Hallmark has become the ubiquitous term for this so-called framework and template of movie during the holidays.
Yes. So we talk about the predictability of it. And I think a lot of people who do not watch Hallmark movies put that as a criticism. And I think that is absolutely a feature of what they are.
Oh, 100%. So they obviously all have, for the most part, happy endings, not the sexual kind. But it reminded me of, I was recently at a book reading here in LA, and this novelist who actually happens to be a screenwriter for a lot of rom-coms just wrote and was reading from her first romance novel. And the question came up in the audience around like what makes a romance novel. And the definition that she cited was that theoretically, to get published in the romance category as an author, there must be a happy ending. There must be love at the end.
Which makes absolute sense, because if you're reading a romance novel, you don't want an unhappy ending. That's not why you bought the book.
That's true. That is so true. What would you call a romance book or plot or story that doesn't have a happy ending?
This is a tangent.
Okay. Well, bring it on.
When I was first reading romance novels in like high school, it was not as popular as it is now.
Yeah.
So like there was a romance novel section, but it was like 3 authors.
Yeah.
It was like Nora Roberts, Joanna Lindsay, like Danielle Steele.
Yeah.
Like, so it's like you either read those authors or you looked for novels with a happy ending, which were not labeled as romance novels.
Yeah.
And that was like not fun because you're reading romance novels for the happy ending.
It's so true. You're reading for the predictability and you're watching for the predictability.
Yes, Carlin, tell us just how predictable Hallmark movies are.
Well, I went down the rabbit hole, and I will also say I should give credit to a 2023 New York Times article that analyzed 424 Hallmark and Hallmark adjacent movies. And just some fun facts for those who are unfamiliar with the Hallmark movie framework, which is essentially often, small town lady who's maybe now living in a big city, usually returns to a small town.
There's very few that actually take place in a big city.
Yes. There's some sort of like problem or mystery that needs to be solved. And she and the man figure it out, often also heteronormative, she and man. And then it usually resolves, the problem or mystery is solved, and they find love at the end.
Live happily ever after.
But this New York Times article pulled some amazing states, and I'm just going to read a couple of them. I will promise not to take long. So 73% of the 2023 titles had Christmas in the title. The most popular female names were Emma, followed by Lucy, Olivia, Emily, Holly, Molly, and Sarah. So, kind of generic white girl names. Can I just say it? Yeah.
Yes.
Lacey Chabert was in 9 movies, and she's definitely in a few this season as well.
She is now the queen of Hallmark. In the last couple years, she has become the go-to actress.
So funny, which is also, she's totally the person too. You're like, oh, she was Gretchen in Mean Girls or was in Party of Five.
It's another millennial touchstone. Yes.
Totally. Okay, so 58 of the men were revisited exes or former crushes. So some of the interesting male occupations were an ice sculptor, a turkey hotline caller, a presumed dead husband.
What?
I know. A fruitcake business consultant, a candy cane company consultant, an adoptive father to her adoptive son brother, which admittedly
That's
I had
too
to
complicated.
I know, exactly. An organ donor and a nutcracker who comes to life.
Yes. Definitely see the Christmas theme.
I know, totally. And then a quarter of the plots, again, usually a small town, they feature a small town or a business in trouble that must be saved. So examples of said businesses: an Alaska Inn, an animal shelter, a bakery that makes Christmas kingles, a lighthouse on a remote island, and a pioneer village, which again, I'm like, what even is a pioneer village? Do you know?
I'm envisioning like a Christmas themed Williamsburg.
Okay. Got it. It's probably holiday themed. Okay. Got it. And then also I found the mysteries to be hilarious. So about 1/10 of all movies have a mystery that needs to be solved. So some of those questions were: is Santa real? What's killing the Christmas trees? Who is the stranger with amnesia? Who stole the cookie recipe?
Oh, God.
And then this is my favorite: why did grandmother have a Norwegian troll? Like, what? Okay. Anyway.
All of these are life or death questions that need to be solved.
So important. And I've decided I would like to raise my hand to be a Hallmark Christmas movie writer, because this seems really fun and playful. So there we go. But anyway, other templates of a Hallmark Christmas movie are not a ton of plot diversity, also not a ton of cultural diversity, which we should probably just quickly name. They've tried to go out and sort of modernize the story a little bit, but
Yes. Though, to give Hallmark its credit, I feel like in the last couple years, they have made an attempt.
That's true. Okay, sure. There's like a couple multiracial couples and, one gay couple.
Right. And also Lifetime and Netflix have done way better at this.
Way better. Totally. Yeah.
Which is part of why the branching out of Hallmark movies into other producers has been very exciting.
Yep. Agreed.
All right. Let's take a break.
Yeah, let's take a break.
One thing we mentioned is that women are almost always the protagonist, the focal point. Let's dig into that.
Yes. Let's dive in.
So that is very different from most media, which often puts the focus on men.
Yep. It's true. I think you're right. But I was looking back on my Goodreads, just a shout out to Goodreads, my favorite social media recently, over the past couple years, and realizing that the majority of the books that I have read have been written by women about women. So even if the large percentage of media is portraying men as the protagonist, I am definitely feeling drawn towards female authors and female protagonists,
And I do
subconsciously
think
or
that
not.
makes sense. I think more, I'm going to have to look up stats for this, but I think more women use books as a media source. So it would make sense that books would be the first to
Okay.
shift to their audience.
Yeah.
But I think also women are programmed in a way to be more empathetic to other heroes, to be able to empathize with main characters that are not necessarily female. And I think that's because a lot of the media that we're exposed to when we're young doesn't center us. And so
Yeah. What about like a Disney movie?
you often see Disney princesses marketed to little girls. And things like Harry Potter, which has a male protagonist, was marketed to all kids.
That's interesting. That's actually a really good point, which is our female protagonist driven content marketed primarily towards women, while as mass produced content more generally features men. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that starts when we're kids, i.e., the Harry Potter Disney princesses example.
Yeah.
But I think that continues as we grow older with like Marvel, which is like the biggest studio produced movies of our time. And clearly, if you were going to gender it, it would be gendered towards men. But like, I also very much enjoy Marvel. But it's like they've got 2 movies with female protagonists. So it's like, clearly I'm not the demographic that they're going after, but they kind of expect me to watch it anyway.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I think also part of it is, having worked a bit in entertainment myself, is there were fewer female originators, creators too. But I do think as we see more female creators and just generally more diverse creators, people write about their own experiences. So we see more of that reflected. But I am actually really curious now that you're talking about this, is how many men are watching that. Because, okay, here's an example. Everything Everywhere All at Once, right? Very much a female protagonist, mother-daughter duo, won the Academy Award. That felt more ubiquitous. I don't know. I guess I agree with you, but I also am seeing, maybe it's just because I feel like so much of the content that I watch, female protagonists.
And I think it makes sense to, and I think there has been an expansion. Like Barbie was like a whole phenomenon.
Yeah.
And men love the men that showed up, love that.
That's true.
Which I think is a little bit of a self-selecting category.
Yeah.
But that was still, it was a female protagonist that was clearly marketed towards women. It was like, you would bring your boyfriend along, and you'd bring your friends along, but who's the driver of that audience? And that's women. So that's, I think, becoming more of a thing. But I think Hallmark was there, at least on television, earlier.
Yep, I agree. I think it was the Danielle Steele, if we use the novel comparison. And this is, I don't know when they started really ramping up on the holiday programming. That's been around for at least, 10 years.
And actually, talking about the romance novels, the original Hallmark movies, before they did the Countdown to Christmas, before they did the more cookie cutter things, were novel adaptations of romance novels.
There we go. So it basically was taking that content and that audience and saying, let's build video content for these people as well too.
And I think because they were romance novel at the beginning, it targeted a lot of older women too. So it wasn't until recently, I think, that they were mostly in their 30s. I think a lot of the actresses were in their 40s and 50s.
Wait, you might know this more than I do. Are romance novels also targeted more at older women?
I wonder if in the past they were, because they were considered more mature. and it's like not something that young women should be
Yeah.
reading. I definitely got that feeling when I was reading them in high school. It was like,
Yeah. No, well, I'm curious if it really is an older woman
I
phenomenon
think at the
too,
beginning it was
or
definitely older women
yeah,
driven.
I don't know.
Like the
I don't know.
stereotypical reader or watcher would have been like a
Yeah.
married woman with kids who's like taking that time to escape from.
Got it. So I think we should make a clarification then, because when you say older, I think like that could be so many different things. I think we're basically talking about middle-aged women in their 30s and 40s. And we just happen to be, I think, when we were introduced to them in our teens and 20s. But I think I'm actually not convinced now that we're talking about it that the creators themselves,
I think we did age into it a bit, but I'm actually thinking about like
the
women
content,
40s
yeah,
plus, and I don't think there's a upper boundary for my what I'm thinking about.
yeah,
But
yeah.
but we have
Okay,
definitely
got it.
aged into it as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, where we see instead of it being older women, we're seeing women are the same age represented in these stories. This is what I think is a little bit interesting about Hallmark Christmas movies and Hallmark movies in general, is it often features not just a woman, but a successful woman who is in her late 30s, early 40s, which in general American culture is that like past her prime, which it
Yes.
really isn't, to be clear. But like cultural norms, though they're shifting, I think sort of put women who are in that age bracket and are still single as like past their prime. Um, and it's like those women who are successfully independent and they find love sort of maybe a little bit later in life than the sort of late 20s, 30s scenario. Like that's interesting.
So so this is actually something I've thought about a lot. Like, why do I like watching Hallmark movies? And I think
Yeah.
and especially around the holidays, I think things can be overwhelming in real life. And like I've said previously, it's a little bit of an
Yeah.
escape. Um, so like we often talk about,
Yeah.
oh, they're going back to a small town. And that's like so reductive. But I
Yeah.
actually have been thinking about this.
Yeah.
And if you kept a Hallmark movie in the big city, it would actually not hit as well because big cities are typically so immersed in the patriarchy that it's not really an escape if you set it there.
Hmm.
Like, you would still, for it to be a realistic big city environment, you'd have to have all the trappings
Yeah.
of, oh, my boss is a
Yeah.
guy, like my boss's boss is a guy, like everything around me is male
Hmm.
oriented. Whereas in a
Yeah.
small town, it's more believable that like the
Yeah.
mayor is a woman or the person running the Christmas raffle is a
Hmm.
woman.
Do you think that's true?
Like, I'm not saying
Really?
that there aren't women bosses in the big
Okay.
city
Yeah. That's
or
interesting.
male mayors.
Not to go too much into politics, but rural towns also tend to be, I think, a little bit more conservative as well, too. So to me, the expectation would be that some of those gender norms might actually be more prevalent in smaller towns.
I think they tend to be more politically conservative, but I think that women actually have maybe a bigger role in day to day small town life.
Yeah. That's interesting. Now I want to run a study on this. Yeah.
I know. Well, you often have this like stereotypical woman who's like the matriarch of her family. And you think of this
Yeah.
pretty conservative, but those
Yeah.
matriarchs are like powerful people in their communities. So to me, it makes more sense if you're having
Mm.
a
Yeah.
female dominated story to actually place it in somewhere where you realistically see women having more contribution to the power, the
Mm.
structure, the society.
I think I always saw it maybe a little bit differently, actually, which was that there are in the big city, there's the trappings of like typical capitalism and the independent woman doesn't need a man, etc. And then you return to a small town where it's a little bit more traditional and cozy, and it's like in some ways actually a buy-in of more traditional normal values. So it's interesting because in some ways I find the Hallmark movie to be completely escapist in some ways, and it is a play out, I think, of the traditional story that many girls are raised to believe,
Yes.
right? Which is you'll find your Prince Charming.
I don't think it's
But
realistic.
I
I
don't
think
think
it's
it's
completely
realistic
escapist.
either.
To segue, I think if we're talking about the traditional roles of women and how it can be used as an escape, we have to talk about TradWives.
TradWives. I know you have a lot to say on this topic. I'm so curious.
So, Carla, how would you define a TradWife? I know how I would define a TradWife, but I was talking to mom and dad about this, and their definition was very different.
So I will say, okay, so my exposure to the TradWife phenomenon, I will say, has primarily been through social media. Especially, I'm not on TikTok a ton, but through TikTok. So think Ballerina Farm-esque. And I think how I think of a TradWife is, again, also tends to be small town rural. So someone who has potentially rejected the more woke, modern businesswoman, lives in a big city path, and instead it has moved to a small town, dresses in like prairie dresses, wears a lot of aprons and pretty things, is really focused on both a natural look, but also still looks really pretty,
Yep.
and has a lot of children. Takes on a traditional sort of mother nurturing role, bakes a lot, cooks a lot, and has a husband who goes off during the day to do his job. And basically the household matriarch in a very like whimsical, pretty, makes it look easy way.
Yes. I would take that definition and just add that for me, the trad wife is the influencer and not necessarily someone who just follows the lifestyle.
Okay, wait. Just explain that. So influencer is the person who says, "Look at this life, come join it."
Yes. And in addition to that, I think there's also a religious element or even a ministerial element of it
Ooh, I like that.
that
Yeah.
so I think like a lot, not all, but I think a lot of what you were describing could be applied to a stay-at-home mom. And to me, that's very different than the trad wife. But like Hallmark movies, I think they're aimed at women as an escapist media,
I agree.
as
I
escapist
agree.
media.
Well, yeah. Underlining the influencer part too is a lot of the tradwives on TikTok, for example, ultimately are selling something.
Right.
Wait, what? I'm so curious. What did mom and dad think? What was their point of view?
So I think dad's was broader in that he was
Yeah.
lumping like stay-at-home moms in
Got
with
it.
trad
Oh,
wives,
I wouldn't. Yeah.
and I would not.
We should
Like
we
I
should make the
think
decision. We should quickly talk through why we think that is.
so for me, a stay-at-home mom is about having a partnership with someone who has valued your work at home,
Yep.
and is not, I'm the provider, you're someone who takes what I've provided and makes a home. It's we're both
Both
providers, but
providing.
we
Yeah.
are providing in different spheres.
Yep. I also think I agree 100% with that. And the other thing I would add to, which maybe doesn't necessarily fall in the definition, but at least falls into my perception of the difference between a trad wife and a stay at home mom, is that I think a stay at home mom, as they show up in the world, give a much more realistic view of what motherhood and home making, I don't know if what the right word is, but it's a lot of work to
Yes.
raise children and cook, and yeah.
And it's not glamorous work
Yeah. They glamorize. Yes.
that is focused on the aesthetically pleasing parts of motherhood and not necessarily the not so pleasant parts of motherhood,
Yeah.
like cleaning up after messy children, or putting a fussy child down for a nap, or
Yep.
changing a diaper, or all the things that I know, as having been a babysitter, know
Yeah.
are the hardest parts of being a mother,
Yep.
without even scratching the surface of what it actually
Oh,
takes to
totally. I
be a
mean,
mother.
a TradWife just has one baby on one hip, another baby on another, and is like somehow still stirring a bowl of chocolate chip cookie dough and wearing like looks super well kept up. And there's flowers in the
Yes.
background and the lighting is perfect. Yeah. Yeah.
And anybody who's taken care of a child knows that
Not the
either
reality.
that is happening off camera or someone else is helping them. And
Yes.
again, off camera. And I think part of the TradWives is that a lot of these women are very financially well off,
Yep.
like very financially well off. And they
Yep.
do not talk about that privilege
Yeah.
on the on these
Yep.
videos.
Yep. Um, so how do you think about TradWives then in the context of a Hallmark protagonist?
To me, they have very different functions
Yeah.
while appearing superficially as the same thing.
Yeah.
So I think the appeal of a trad wife video is that life is hard.
Yeah.
Like, especially for millennial women, I think we were told early on that we were supposed to want it all,
Yeah.
and wanting it all
And then have it all too.
and then
Yeah.
have it all. And that is just not feasible in today's world. It
Yeah.
should be. Like, we
Yep.
should have, me and my soapbox, we should
Yeah.
have the social services that allow women to have it all. But in the current climate, it is not possible without putting unbelievable stress on a woman.
Yeah.
And so the appeal of retreating to a homestead and simply raising your children is like a fantasy. It's very appealing. It's
Totally.
like, I don't have to want it all. And I actually think,
Mm.
like a couple of years ago, on the flip side, do you remember the girl boss
Oh, yeah.
phenomenon?
Yep.
I think it was actually the same thing. It was
Mm.
like, except it was like the opposite. It was like,
Yeah.
you don't have to have it all. But if you focus on your career, you can have it all in that sphere.
Yep. I will also say though, having worked for one of the girl bosses, is that those girl bosses, then many of them have now since left their companies and are raising kids. Still doing amazing
Yes.
things, but yeah. Yeah.
But I think it dialed into this fantasy of, if you just put all your energy into one thing,
Yeah.
in that one thing, you can be amazing.
Yep. Yep. Oh, that's really interesting. And I think, to your point, Hallmark movies, many of these women, again, end up being like big city. They start off as big city career women. They move to a small town. They honestly, in some sense, trade love and end up staying, presumably, in said small town for a much more balanced, love filled life, which is
Yeah.
interesting.
But I think, for me, what the difference is between TradWives and Hallmark, and maybe this is naive of me, but I think this is a function of the TradWife media,
Hmm.
is that when you watch it, you get that dopamine hit because you're like, oh, that's the fantasy, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But the more you watch it, I think the more isolating it is. Like, they are not surrounded by community
The
in
Hallmark
those videos.
movies, you mean, or the TradWife?
No, the trad
Oh,
wives.
okay. Okay.
They've got their kids and potentially their spouse pops in every once in a while,
Yeah.
but it
Yeah.
really focuses on the woman in her isolation.
Yeah.
And that's actually kind of depressing. And so you kind of want that dopamine hit again. So you continue to watch these videos hoping
Mm,
for some kind of payoff. And I think you kind of get more depressed as you watch them.
yeah. I was thinking about this because I think I've mentioned to you before, I find TradWife content really alienating. While as obviously Hallmark movies, even though I don't think they're the most realistic. I love them. I think for me, it actually comes down to the fact that I think Hallmark movies are meant to be truly escapist, and escapist in the sense of like, this is not supposed to be real. Like the per the facts that we talked about earlier, like she goes to small town, ice sculptor, solves the like, is Santa real mystery, falls in love, etc. Like that doesn't happen. So there's a layer of unrealistic that actually makes it feel that's like part of it. While as a TradWife, these are real people. Like these are real people documenting their so-called lives.
Well, curating their so-called lives.
Yes, curating their so-called lives, but they are real people, right?
Yes.
And so they are living real lives that are not fictional. And to the fact that they are therefore, I think, curating or putting on this vibe that is meant to say this is real is so alienating to me. While as Hallmark, I think, does not take itself too seriously.
Yes. And also in that alienating thing is, I think a lot of the Hallmark movie plot, the predictable plot, is about finding community.
Yep.
So by the end, so at the beginning, they're all isolated and frustrated and worn out and alone.
Yeah.
And at the end, they've got the whole town or the whole village, or everybody's rallying behind them.
It's very hopeful.
They found their community.
Yeah.
And it's definitely escapist, but I think, but I think it taps into the things that make us happy versus the TradWives, which I think manipulates our fears and our stress to keep us watching.
Yep. So moral of the story is you and I are going to move to small towns in, respective, maybe upstate Vermont. Is upstate Vermont a thing? Maybe a little small town in Vermont.
Snow is a must.
We will, maybe it'll be maybe it's a maple syrup tapper is like, that's who I envision. And it's like an inn that needs saving, and we save it. I fall in love with the maple syrup tapper, and I live in Vermont forever and ever, surrounded by friends.
And just by you being the heroine, it makes it more progressive. So that box is checked.
Oh my gosh. And tonight I will probably now need to watch a Hallmark Christmas movie,
Yes.
Gotta love a good female protagonist, culture, TradWife, Hallmark Christmas movie combo.
Yeah, we've covered a lot. Talk to you later.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed our conversation this week, we look forward to sharing more with you.
Follow us now so that when our next episode premieres in 2 weeks, you can be sure not to miss it. You can find us wherever you listen to your podcasts.
See you next time, everyone.